The meeting was already underway when my name appeared on the screen. Not in the agenda. On a slide titled, Operational Failure. My boss stood beside it, calm and authoritative, explaining how a single oversight had put the company at risk. His finger pointed at metrics, timelines, missed benchmarks, all of them tied directly to my name. He didn't look at me when he said it. Everyone else did. I felt heat climb my neck as 50 pairs of eyes found me sitting in the third row. My stomach dropped. This was wrong. All of it was wrong. I replayed the last month in my head, searching for the mistake he was describing. It didn't exist. The work was mine, but the numbers weren't. He concluded by saying accountability mattered more than intent, then sat down like he'd just solved a problem. The room exhaled. No one defended me. No one asked questions. That silence was louder than any accusation. I realized something irreversible had happened, not just to my reputation but to how people saw me now. As the meeting moved on to the next agenda item, I caught something that made my blood run cold. The file name at the bottom of the slide deck changed for a split second. That detail stayed with me long after the room emptied and I sat alone at my desk, staring at nothing, trying to piece together how this had happened. He stopped me in the hallway before I reached my desk. His tone was almost kind, which somehow made it worse. He said leadership required sacrifice and that I'd bounce back if I handled this correctly. When I asked what he meant by that, he lowered his voice so only I could hear. This would be reflected in my review if I cooperated. His words hung in the air between us like a blade. I nodded slowly, not because I understood, but because I didn't know what else to do. Silence confused him. He waited for gratitude or fear. Gave neither. That night I sat at my desk and opened my inbox. I found 3 emails forwarded to me. Clients asking why timelines had shifted. I hadn't shifted them. My hands shook as I read their questions, realizing he'd told them I was responsible. That night I logged into the project system from home. I didn't download anything. I wasn't stupid enough to leave obvious traces. I just looked. Version histories. Edit trails. Permissions. I traced through every change. My confirmation came like a punch. Changes had been made after my final submission. My name was still attached to the work. His was not. Someone had deliberately removed his tracks. My hands shook, but not from fear anymore, from clarity. This wasn't incompetence. This was calculated. I created a private document on my personal laptop and titled it with the date. I wrote one sentence in it. Start observing. Don't react. I saved it, encrypted it, and closed everything. Then I sat in the dark for a long time, understanding that my life at this company had just split into a before and after. The next week felt heavier than any week before it. Meetings happened without me. Decisions were made, then announced as final. I was CC'd instead of invited. It was subtle enough to deny, obvious enough to feel intentional. The exclusion was methodical. I focused on my work and documented everything. Every request, every delay, every contradiction, every time his story changed. I noticed how often he spoke for me in meetings, summarizing my position incorrectly, then correcting it when I tried to clarify. I let him do it. Power likes an audience, and I was learning to be invisible. One afternoon, I received a calendar invite labeled, Process Review. He added senior leadership and removed my preparation time. I showed up early anyway, watching him arrange his notes at the head of the table. While they talked, I watched him fumble details he should have known. He filled gaps with confidence. No one challenged him because he sounded certain. After the meeting, an operations manager lingered behind. She didn't say much, just that something felt off. I didn't push. Just listened. She'd noticed something was wrong. That was enough. That night, I added her name to my log. Not as an ally yet. As a variable. Someone was watching too. The story was getting bigger than me, and I needed to understand the whole board. He escalated by sending a formal warning. It cited missed benchmarks that didn't match the system records. The language was polished, legal, final. I signed it without protest. That surprised him. I saw it in his posture when I handed it back. He expected resistance. He wanted resistance. Instead, I asked for clarity on expectations moving forward. He gave vague answers and ended the meeting quickly. I walked out with the warning and something unexpected. New access granted for performance improvement. That access was a gift wrapped in irony. With it, I could see cross-department edits, approval chains, and archived comments. I didn't rush. I knew better. I traced patterns methodically over the next week. Late-night changes. Edits clustered around his login times at 10 p.m., 2 a.m., 4 a.m. Notes deleted, then re-added differently. Comments stripped of context. He was rewriting history in real time, one keystroke at a time. I didn't screenshot yet. I needed context. Proof without a story is noise. I needed the narrative. As I worked through the files that night, diving deeper into systems I'd never seen before, I felt something shift inside me. The shock was gone. The fear was fading. In its place was focus. He thought the warning silenced me. He thought the pressure would make me quit. He didn't understand that the warning had given me permission to look closer than I ever could before. A town hall was announced. He would present lessons learned from recent failures. I knew what that meant. I would be the lesson. I sat in the back of the auditorium. He spoke confidently, using my project as a case study in failure. He never said my name, but everyone knew. He framed himself as the one who caught the issue early, the one who had the foresight to protect the company. That was new. That was a lie. I'd never seen him flag anything. After the presentation, applause rippled through the room. I clapped too, maintaining the mask. I noticed 3 people exchange looks when he mentioned dates that didn't align. Small things. My mind was cataloging every inconsistency. Back at my desk, I received a system notification. A file restored from archive. My heart quickened. Curious, I opened it. It was an earlier version of my report, the one I'd submitted before any changes were made. With comments, his comments, directing changes that caused the very issue he blamed on me. He'd walked me into a trap and then acted shocked when I stepped into it. The restore had triggered an audit trail automatically. I felt my pulse quicken, but I didn't celebrate. One file could be explained away. I needed more. I needed a pattern so clear that no one could deny it. I saved the audit log to my private folder and labeled it carefully with dates and times. Then I closed everything and went home. I cooked dinner slowly, methodically, letting my mind work through what I'd found. I slept better than I had in weeks. He started avoiding me. Instructions came through intermediaries. Feedback arrived secondhand. That told me he was nervous. Authority doesn't like mirrors, and I was becoming one. I kept performing quietly and competently. I asked for clarification in writing. I summarized meetings afterward and sent notes to attendees. Not accusatory, just factual. It created a paper trail he couldn't control without effort. Created a record. One afternoon, compliance requested documentation related to my project. Routine, they said. I sent exactly what they asked for, and nothing more. A day later, my boss asked if compliance had contacted me. His voice was casual, but his eyes weren't. I said yes, they did. He nodded and told me not to worry. As if I would. That night, I reviewed access logs again. He'd been in the system repeatedly after hours. Editing. Deleting. Restoring. Documenting. Each action left a trace. Even the deletions left traces. Metadata, timestamps, phantom files. I exported the logs methodically and stored them off-network on an encrypted drive. For the first time, I allowed myself to think this might end differently than he planned. That maybe there was a way out of this that didn't involve me disappearing. The pressure shifted from public to personal. He scheduled weekly check-ins, framed as support. Each one included a reminder of how replaceable I was. How many talented people wanted my position. How lucky I was to still have a job. I listened. took notes. I asked questions that forced him to explain decisions on record. Sometimes he contradicted himself. I didn't correct him. Contradictions mature when left alone. They grow stronger. Meanwhile, the operations manager I'd noticed earlier asked if we could talk. We met over coffee near the office, far from the building. She said she'd been asked to validate numbers she hadn't reviewed. She declined. After that, she was sidelined like me. Our experiences mirrored each other perfectly. Still, we didn't agree to anything explicit. We didn't form an alliance. We just shared timelines. They aligned too well. Back at work, an email went out announcing a restructuring. My role would shift. Less visibility, less influence, more risk. I read it 3 times, analyzing every word, understanding what each one meant. At the bottom was a line about accountability. I added the email to my archive. He was building a case. So was I. And mine was beginning to have weight. The first real test came when a client questioned discrepancies directly. He forwarded the email to me with a single line. "Handle this." I replied, all with documentation attached. Clear. Verifiable. Polite. Professional. The client thanked me and asked for clarification from leadership on next steps. He didn't respond. He couldn't respond without contradicting something he'd said. Instead, he called me into his office and said I'd overstepped. Asked how. He said tone. Asked for specifics. He ended the meeting. This was his move. Create a problem he knows I'll solve, then punish me for solving it. Later that day, I received another warning, this one citing communication issues. I signed it too. Pattern was obvious now. Warnings weren't about correction. They were about narrative construction, building a case against me. That night, I organized my evidence chronologically on a spreadsheet. Emails, logs, comments, timestamps. Each piece supported the same conclusion. Still, I didn't act. Exposure too early would look defensive. I needed him confident. I needed him to keep moving. So I stayed quiet. I let the warnings stack. Each one made his eventual fall steeper. Silence, I learned, is unsettling to people who rely on fear. An internal audit was announced company-wide. Officially routine. Unofficially, everyone felt it. People whispered. He sent a message emphasizing transparency and cooperation. I replied with a single word. Understood. The audit team requested access to project materials. This time, my boss insisted on being present in every meeting. I welcomed it. I wanted witnesses. In the meeting, he spoke over me, reframing questions before I could answer. The auditors took notes. I watched their faces carefully. They were noticing something. Afterward, one of them asked me for a separate follow-up. Just clarification, she said. I provided facts. Processes. No opinions. No accusations. I watched her expression change slightly when I mentioned approval workflows and who had authority to change them. A week later, my boss told me I was being removed from the project, for my own good. Thanked him. That confused him again. Being removed meant less pressure, and more distance from his control. I used the time to double-check everything. Redundancy matters. I made copies of everything twice. I verified every log. I cross-referenced every email. Isolation became his final tactic. Meetings happened without notice. Access was revoked, then restored partially. Each change was documented by the system. He forgot that. He thought he was erasing me. One afternoon, he sent an email summarizing our agreement about responsibility. It was fiction. I replied with a correction, citing previous messages. He didn't respond. Instead, HR requested a meeting. He was there when I arrived. The conversation was framed as concern. Performance. Team dynamics. I answered calmly and carefully. When asked about discrepancies, I referred to documented processes. I didn't accuse. I didn't speculate. I just told the truth. HR asked for time to think things through. After the meeting, he told me this would be resolved quickly if I stayed cooperative. He nodded. That night, I received an automated notice. Audit findings pending review. I stared at the screen for a long time. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew the waiting was almost over. Clock was moving. The review meeting was scheduled without explanation. Senior leadership HR audit team. He arrived confident, greeting everyone by name like they were friends. I sat quietly, hands folded. The audit lead spoke first. She outlined discrepancies between reported failures and system records. She displayed logs. My logs, the ones I'd carefully documented. He shifted in his seat. When asked to explain late-night edits, he said it was standard oversight. She asked why approvals were altered after submission. He hesitated. I watched the room lean forward. They turned to me. I answered simply, referring to policy and procedure. No emotion, just facts. He interrupted, trying to correct me. She stopped him. That was new. The power dynamic cracked right there in the room. They requested a short break. In the hallway, he whispered that this wasn't over. I believed him. When we returned, the audit lead continued. The story she told didn't center me at all. It centered process abuse, authority misused, patterns repeated across projects. Leadership asked him to step out. He looked at me as if I'd betrayed him. I hadn't. I just stopped covering. Inside the room, questions shifted to impact, reputation, risk, legal liability. I answered carefully, emphasizing the work, not the damage to me. That mattered. They asked why I hadn't raised concerns earlier. I said I had through proper channels. I referenced emails. Char nodded. They already had them. When he returned, the tone was different. Less authority. More defense. He spoke quickly, over-explaining. Every sentence created another thread to pull. The audit lead thanked everyone and said next steps would follow. No decisions yet. He avoided my eyes as we left. That evening, an email went out placing him on temporary leave pending review. My phone buzzed with messages from coworkers. Questions. Accusations that I'd set him up. I didn't respond. I went home and cooked dinner slowly, feeling the weight lift slightly. Work changed overnight. Access restored. Meetings rescheduled with me included. No one mentioned him by name. It was like he'd been erased. Char checked in, asking how I was holding up. I said I was focused on work. That was true. The audit continued, expanding scope. More departments. More patterns. I was asked to provide additional context on his behavior. I did. Each time I stuck to facts. No speculation. No emotion. Leadership thanked me for professionalism. That word felt heavy. Weeks later, I learned he'd attempted to justify actions by citing pressure from above. Targets. Expectations. The explanation didn't hold. Pressure doesn't rewrite logs. One afternoon, HR informed me the review was concluding. I asked what that meant for my warnings. They said those were under reconsideration. I felt something loosen in my chest. Not vindication, closure. I'd carried the weight long enough. When the official notice came, it was brief. He was no longer with the company. No announcement. Just absence. Authority dissolves quietly. They removed the warnings from my record. Char apologized. Leadership acknowledged process failures. No one said his name. I didn't need them to. My reputation repaired itself through consistency. Clients returned. Colleagues asked for input again. One apologized for staying silent. Accepted it. Silence is contagious in hierarchical spaces. I understood that now. A month later, I was asked to lead a new initiative, focused on transparency and documentation. I agreed. Not as a victory lap, but as a boundary. I set clear documentation standards. Shared access. No single point of control. People noticed. Trust rebuilt slowly but genuinely. I began receiving messages from people I'd never worked with directly. Colleagues from other departments telling me they'd heard what happened and were grateful someone had finally documented the truth. A few admitted they'd experienced similar treatment from him. Their stories mirrored mine perfectly. The deeper review uncovered something no one expected. His behavior wasn't isolated. Audit findings revealed a pattern across multiple projects, all structured the same way. Authority concentrated. Accountability displaced downward. Leadership called it a systemic risk. I called it arrogance repeating itself. I was asked to walk the review team through my documentation again, this time as a reference point. I noticed how differently people listen now. Not with suspicion but with focus. One executive asked how long I'd been tracking discrepancies. I answered honestly. From the moment my work appeared under someone else's name. The room went quiet. They hadn't known that part. They assumed escalation came later. I explained why it didn't. Retaliation risk. Power imbalance. Silence as survival. Heads nodded. Notes were taken. This wasn't about me anymore. My case had become a template for identifying abuse without creating noise. I learned later that 7 other employees had similar stories. 7. Each one was afraid to speak up. Each one had stayed silent. But my documentation had given them permission. It had given them proof. One woman approached me weeks later in the hallway and thanked me with tears in her eyes. She'd almost quit. She'd almost believed she was the problem. My silence and my evidence had saved her. Legal entered the process next. Carefully, methodically. I was interviewed for hours. Every answer mattered. I stuck to dates, actions, systems. No character judgments. They already had those. When asked how the situation affected me, I paused. Then I said it forced me to choose between reacting emotionally or responding strategically. Chose strategy. That answer landed hard. Afterward, HR followed up about role realignment, this time framed as opportunity, not containment. I negotiated calmly. Access, autonomy, clear escalation paths. They agreed to everything. Power shifts when truth becomes expensive to ignore. Later, I learned he'd attempted to contact legal directly, disputing findings. The attempt backfired. It contradicted previous statements. Each move tightened the net. I felt no satisfaction watching it happen. Only distance. The lawyers told me his termination was inevitable. The documentation was airtight. No jury, no tribunal would side with him. The evidence spoke in a language that transcended emotion. Data, timestamps, system records. He had literally left a digital trail of his dishonesty. And I had collected every piece of it. Rumors surfaced quietly. People pieced together fragments. I avoided confirming anything. Speculation weakens facts. Leadership scheduled a closed-door session to discuss next steps company-wide. I was invited, not as a subject but as a contributor. That distinction mattered. We discussed safeguards, documentation standards, audit triggers. I suggested removing unilateral control points. The room agreed faster than I expected. Abuse thrives where process bends to personality. Removing that leverage felt like the real victory. After the meeting, a senior executive thanked me for not burning the place down. I understood what he meant. I also understood why I hadn't. Destruction would have been easy. Precision took patience. That evening, I deleted the private log I'd kept for months. Not because it wasn't needed, but because it had served its purpose. I felt lighter without it. The weight I'd been carrying, the burden of proof, the responsibility of documentation, lifted. The systems now held that weight. The company itself was accountable. I no longer needed to be. The new policies rolled out slowly. Department heads received training on documentation requirements. Access controls tightened. Approval workflows became transparent and auditable. I watched from a distance as my suggestions became regulations. Some people resisted. Change always triggers resistance, especially when it takes away informal power. But the resistance was noted. Documented. I'd recommended that too. Within weeks, the company looked different. People asked questions before acting. They created paper trails intentionally. They understood that shortcuts came with consequences. I realized something profound during this time. I hadn't defeated my boss. The systems had. He'd given me the tools. His arrogance, his digital footprints, his inability to stop, and I'd used them methodically. But it was the structure, the policy, the accountability that actually ended him. That was the real lesson. Authority thrives in darkness and loose systems. Remove the darkness. Tighten the systems. Authority collapses. 3 months after his departure, something shifted in me. I realized I was no longer afraid. Not of authority. Not of retaliation. Not of speaking up. The fear had been real once. Had controlled me. But it was gone now, replaced by something steadier. Confidence. Not arrogance. Confidence rooted in evidence, in preparation, in knowing my ground. I began mentoring younger employees. I showed them how to document work, how to communicate in writing, how to create accountability without creating hostility. A young professional asked me one day how I knew so much about systems and processes. I told them the truth. I'd had to learn. I'd been pushed to the edge and had to figure out how to survive. Now I got to use that knowledge to help others avoid the same edge. They nodded, understanding. That conversation meant more to me than any promotion or apology ever could. The formal conclusion arrived in a sealed email. Findings substantiated. Actions taken. Policy revisions underway. No names mentioned. Still everyone knew. The absence spoke louder than announcements ever could. HR asked if I wanted to make a statement. I declined. My silence had already said enough. Weeks passed. Normalcy returned, reshaped. New leadership approached decisions cautiously. Transparency became routine instead of performative. I noticed how often people asked for confirmation now. Not out of fear but respect. One afternoon, a junior colleague asked how I stayed calm through it all. I told her calm isn't the absence of fear. It's discipline in its presence. She nodded, understanding something essential. I added something else. The best revenge isn't loud. It's quiet and structural. It's making sure the system itself prevents what happened to you from happening to anyone else. A promotion discussion surfaced unexpectedly. I didn't chase it. That surprised them. I asked about scope, authority, and protections first. Titles mean nothing without structure. They adjusted the offer. Not as a favor, as acknowledgement. Accepted. On my first day in the new role, I reviewed the systems that once trapped me. I redesigned workflows to make quiet edits impossible. Transparency wasn't optional anymore. Some resisted. Held firm. Consistency builds trust faster than charm. Occasionally I'd catch a glance, a mix of curiosity and respect. They knew what I'd endured without knowing details. I wasn't defined by what happened to me. I was defined by how I responded. The difference mattered. In my new position I had authority now. Real authority. But I used it differently. I delegated. I explained decisions. I created clear pathways for feedback. I built systems that worked without me as the linchpin. That was the opposite of what he'd done. He'd consolidated power. I distributed it. Months later, an external inquiry referenced my case as an example of internal correction done right. No names, just outcomes. I read it twice. Once as validation. Once as a warning of how easily systems fail when authority goes unchecked. I shared it with my team. We discussed it openly. Not as gossip but as education. Power doesn't corrupt loudly. It erodes quietly. That lesson stayed with me. Occasionally, I wondered if he understood where he misstepped. Probably not. Arrogance rarely reflects. Rationalizes. I didn't need his understanding. Had mine. The work continued. Clean. Measured. Intentional. When challenges arose, I addressed them early, on record, in daylight. No shadows anymore. I'd learned that silence could be strategic, but only when paired with documentation. Silence alone is just passivity. Silence with evidence is power. That was my secret. That was what had worked. The final loose end came when HR asked if I wanted my experience included in leadership training. Anonymously, I agreed. Not to relive it, but to neutralize it. The session focused on warning signs, credit displacement, narrative control, retaliation patterns. I watched leaders take notes, some uncomfortable, some grateful. Growth often looks like discomfort before change. Afterward, a director approached me and said she wished she'd known earlier what to look for. I told her most people do, too late. That's why systems matter more than heroes. Walking back to my office, I felt something close to pride. Not in endurance, but in outcome. My story wasn't a tragedy anymore. It was a textbook. It was a lesson. It was a tool that would help people recognize abuse before it spiraled. That transformation, from victim to teacher, was the final piece of healing I didn't know I needed. Time gave the final perspective. The betrayal no longer felt personal. It felt predictable. Authority unchecked behaves the same everywhere. I stopped asking why it happened and focused on why it ended the way it did. Evidence, timing, composure. I hadn't outplayed him emotionally. I'd outlasted him structurally. One evening, an old colleague asked if I ever wanted to confront him directly. Said no. Confrontation centers the wrong person. Truth doesn't need a stage. Needs light. That answer surprised her. It surprised me once too. But growth often does. As I walked away, I realized something quietly powerful. I wasn't angry anymore. Not relieved. Not triumphant. Just clear. The wound had scarred over. What remained was insight. I understood now how power worked. How abuse functioned. How systems could either enable monsters or neutralize them. That knowledge made me dangerous in the best way. Dangerous to abuse itself. The official closure came in a performance review. My strongest yet. Leadership cited integrity, resilience, and strategic judgment. Words that once felt abstract now had weight. I signed it and closed the file. No attachments. No logs. No backups. I didn't need them. The system remembered. People remembered. And I remembered who I was before the betrayal, and who I became after it. On my way out that day, I passed the conference room where it began. The screen was off. Chairs empty. I paused for a moment, then kept walking. The power that once filled that room was gone. Replaced by something steadier. I wasn't erased. I wasn't broken. I was refined. That mattered more than revenge ever could. Closure isn't an ending. It's alignment. And for the first time in a long while, everything felt aligned. The person I'd become was the person I wanted to be. A new hire joined my team weeks later. Smart. Observant. She asked thoughtful questions. I saw myself in her. When she asked about navigating authority, I gave her simple advice. Document early, speak clearly, and never assume silence means safety. She nodded, absorbing it. The cycle had shifted. Knowledge replaced fear. I realized then that the revenge story people expect, exposure, collapse, spectacle, misses the real ending. The real ending is stability. Systems that don't rely on personality. Careers that survive power games intact. As I shut down my office for the night, I felt gratitude. Not for the betrayal, but for the clarity it forced. Some lessons only arrive through pressure. I'd survived mine without losing myself. That was the win. Quiet. Clean. Complete. And the more time passed, the more I understood. The best victory isn't visible. It's living differently because you learned better. I never spoke his name again. I didn't need to. His authority ended the moment evidence outgrew his control. My story didn't end with applause or confrontation. It ended with trust restored, systems corrected, and my career intact. That's the kind of ending that lasts. When people ask how I handled it, I say I didn't fight power with noise. I let it collapse under its own weight. Silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. Evidence wasn't revenge. It was truth. And truth, given time and patience, doesn't need help winning. The real victory wasn't his fall. It was everything that grew in the space where he used to be. A workplace where documentation mattered. Where transparency was non-negotiable. Where power couldn't hide. That's what I built from the ashes of what he'd tried to destroy. And that's worth more than any apology or explanation he could ever offer.